Hakeem Kigundu, a 33-year-old man, was sentenced to a whole life term for the murder of his neighbours, Richard Burgess, 46, and Neil Morris, 45, after setting fire to their flat in Row Court, Reading, Berkshire, on the 15th of December, 2021. The fire, which Kigundu deliberately started, also seriously injured 2 other residents. The attack was described by the court as premeditated and motivated by revenge after Kigundu became angry over complaints about his antisocial behavior and the loss of his job as a BT engineer. In the days leading up to the fire, he purchased 40 litres of petrol, a sledgehammer, and a vendetta mask, and even recorded a voice note stating his intention to kill his neighbours, creating an email address with the words, "Burn them all." Kigundu admitted to 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of causing grievous bodily harm, and 1 count of arson with intent to endanger life at Reading Crown Court in October 2022, and was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order. During the Court of Appeal hearing, 3 judges, Lord Justice William Davis, Mr. Justice Murray, and Judge Robert Altham, dismissed his bid to have the sentence reduced, stating that his actions were sufficiently serious and egregious, with quite catastrophic consequences that could not be overstated. Lord Justice Davis emphasised that Kigundu had effectively been planning mass murder. Eyewitness accounts highlighted the scale and cruelty of the attack. Joel Richards, a survivor who suffered 3rd-degree burns and had to jump from a 2nd-floor window to escape, described seeing Kigundu laughing from his car outside as the building burned. The Court of Appeal upheld that the combination of premeditation, lethal intent, and the devastating impact on multiple victims justified the whole life sentence, confirming that Kigundu will remain in prison for the rest of his life without the possibility of release. Levi Bellfield, born Levi Rabbits, is a British serial killer, gapist, kidnapper, and burglar of Romani descent. His father died of leukemia when Bellfield was 10, and he was raised with his siblings on a council estate in southwest London. Bellfield later fathered 11 children with 5 different women. From an early age, he displayed criminal tendencies, with his first conviction for burglary at age 13. He went on to amass convictions for assaulting a police officer, theft, and driving offences, and by 2002, he had 9 convictions and nearly a year in prison. Investigators described him as a charming but highly violent individual, capable of switching instantly from affable to aggressive. Bellfield targeted young blonde women and was known to stalk and observe his victims in areas he knew well. He used his wheel-clamping business in West Drayton as a cover to move around and locate potential targets. His confirmed victims include Marsha McDonnell, a 19-year-old beaten over the head near her home in February 2003, Amélie Delagrange, a 22-year-old French student attacked at Twickenham Green in August 2004, Millie Dowler, a 13-year-old abducted and murdered in March 2002, and Kate Sheedy, then 18, who survived being deliberately run over in May 2004. He was arrested on 22 November 2004 for Delagrange's murder, and subsequently charged with multiple gapes, assaults, murders, and attempted murders spanning several years. On the 25th of February 2008, Bellfield was convicted of the murders of McDonnell and Delagrange and the attempted murder of Sheedy, receiving a whole life order. On 23 June 2011, he was convicted of murdering Millie Dowler and received a second whole life order, making him the first prisoner in the UK to be given 2 such sentences. Bellfield refused to attend court during some of his proceedings, citing perceived unfair media coverage. He is currently serving his sentence at HM Prison Frankland in County Durham, with no possibility of parole. Jamie Reynolds pleaded guilty to the murder of 17-year-old Georgia Williams, whom he lured to his home in Wellington, Shropshire, in May 2013. After killing her, he disposed of her body near Wrexham, North Wales. Her remains were discovered shortly after Reynolds was arrested in Glasgow several days later. Reynolds had a history of violent behaviour. In 2008, he attempted to strangle a girl, which resulted only in a final warning from police. In 2011, he drove his car into another girl's vehicle after she rejected his advances But this incident was not linked to the earlier attack. Authorities, including the Justice Liaison Service and local police, were aware that Reynolds had viewed violent pornography and had created graphic images of young women and teenage girls he knew personally. However, these warnings were not treated with sufficient seriousness, and the potential victims were not alerted. Despite involvement from multiple agencies, there was no coordinated system to monitor Reynolds, leaving many who knew him unaware of his dangerous behavior. Following his conviction for Georgia Williams' murder, media reports suggested that the tragedy might have been prevented if police and social services had acted on prior information about Reynolds. Proper intervention could have led to monitoring him more closely or registering him as a sex offender, even if he had not yet been imprisoned for earlier offenses. Reynolds, who was 22 when he committed the murder and 23 when he went to trial, admitted to the killing on 2 December 2013. His sentencing was delayed until the 19th of December, when the judge imposed a life sentence with a recommendation that he should never be released. Psychiatric reports presented during sentencing warned that Reynolds had the potential to become a serial killer and was likely to remain a serious threat to women throughout his life. At 22, Reynolds became one of the youngest individuals in British history to receive a whole-life tariff. Mark Martin, born on the 18th of October 1979, is a British serial killer who became known in the media as the Sneinton Strangler. He was an only child and suffered severe bullying at school due to a prominent birthmark under his left eye. His father spent time in prison, reportedly alongside the Cray twins. By the age of 16, Martin had turned to petty crime. In his early 20s, he married but was violent toward his wife, leading to their separation in 2004. Homeless by this time, Martin lived on the streets of Nottingham and became a feared figure within the homeless community. Alongside fellow rough sleepers, John Ashley and Dean Carr, he stole from others and gained a reputation as aggressive, volatile, and dominant, often described as the leader of the pack. Martin sought notoriety and openly boasted about wanting to become Nottingham's first serial killer. On 24 January 2005, he, Ashley, Carr, and 25-year-old homeless woman Ellen Frith were at a derelict flat on Marple Road in Nottingham. Martin attacked Frith, strangling her to death and then injecting her with a syringe before setting fire to the flat. Firefighters discovered her body after extinguishing the blaze. Witnesses later confirmed Martin, Ashley, and Carr had been present when the fire started. Martin even called the police days later to boast about the murder. Martin also admitted to killing two other homeless women, 18-year-old Katie Baxter and 26-year-old Zoe Pennick. Baxter had been lured to Martin's tent with the promise of cigarettes before being strangled, while Pennick went missing around the same time. Their bodies were later discovered under rubble near Martin's tent, and forensic analysis confirmed they had been killed between late December 2004 and early January 2005. All three men were tried at Nottingham Crown Court in January 2006. Martin and Ashley were charged with the murders of Baxter and Pennick, while Dean Carr was charged with Frith's murder. Witnesses from the homeless community testified about the defendants' confessions. Martin, as the ringleader, was convicted of all three murders and sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order. Ashley received a 25-year minimum term for involvement in two murders, and Carr was given a 14-year minimum term for Frith's murder. Marcus Osbourne was sentenced to a whole life order for the brutal murder of his ex-partner, Katie Higton, and her new boyfriend, Stephen Harnett. The killings were described by Mrs. Justice Lambert KC at Leeds Crown Court as ferocious, merciless and sustained, and Osbourne will never be released. Days before the murders, Higton had told police she feared for her life. Osbourne attacked her in a frenzied stabbing, inflicting 99 injuries. He then used her Snapchat account to lure Harnett to his death. After the killings, Osbourne declared, "Romeo and Juliet, they can fucking die together now," appeared calm, and was even seen laughing. Evidence presented in court indicated that he gaped Higton when she was dead or dying and mutilated Harnett. The following morning, he invited a neighbor to view the bodies. Osbourne from Huddersfield pleaded guilty to double murder, gape, and false imprisonment. The judge emphasized that his sentence was rare and reserved for the most extreme cases, noting that his actions were horrific and without mitigating factors apart from the guilty plea. The court found that both killings were sexually motivated, stemming from Osbourne's jealousy. Highton and Osbourne had been in a 5-year relationship during which he became coercive, controlling, and physically abusive, dictating what she could wear, whom she could see, and how she could use social media. Friends reported that Highton had changed from being fun, bubbly, and independent to posting about sadness online. The final straw was a violent assault that left her immobilized for several days. After leaving Osbourne, she was determined not to return, but he had threatened her with death if she formed a new relationship. In addition to the whole life sentence for the murders, Osbourne received 10 years imprisonment for the gape and false imprisonment charges, to run concurrently. Louis de Zoysa was sentenced to a whole life order for the murder of Sergeant Matt Ratana, meaning he will spend the rest of his life in prison. De Zoysa shot Ratana, 54, in the chest at point-blank range at a custody block in Croydon, South London, in September 2020, after smuggling a gun into the police station while handcuffed. His defense argued diminished responsibility, claiming de Zoysa had an autistic meltdown caused by the stress of his arrest and confinement. But after a 3-week trial at Northampton Crown Court, a jury convicted him of murder. Passing sentence, Mr. Justice Johnson stated that de Zoysa's actions were voluntary, controlled, and deliberate, emphasizing that autism was not to blame for the killing. Video footage showed that Ratana and other officers treated him with kindness, yet de Zoysa concealed the weapon and made efforts to retrieve it while handcuffed. Ratana, originally from New Zealand, was the custody sergeant at the Windmill Road Custody Centre, where de Zoysa was brought after being arrested for possession of cannabis and ammunition. During the attack, de Zoysa also inflicted a self-shot gun wound to his neck, leaving him with brain damage and physical disability. Ratana's partner, Sue Bushby, described his murder as the most devastating event of her life, highlighting the trauma and grief caused by losing him in such a violent manner. De Zoysa's background revealed a history of bullying, domestic abuse, and a late autism diagnosis, but he had lived independently, worked as a tax analyst at HMRC, and maintained a long-term relationship. Authorities found a large cache of weapons at his home, alongside material relating to right-wing and Islamic extremism and homophobia, though he later denied any interest in these ideologies. De Zoysa will serve his sentence at HMP Belmarsh in southeast London, and showed no visible emotion as he was informed he would spend the rest of his life in prison. Paul O'Hara was sentenced to a whole life term for murdering his girlfriend, Sherilee Shannon, just a year after being released for killing a previous partner. On 17th March, O'Hara forced his way into Miss Shannon's home in Rawtenstall, Greater Manchester, while she was reporting his domestic abuse to 2 attending police officers. He attacked the officers with a hammer before chasing Miss Shannon into the street, where he stabbed her to death. Neighbors witnessed the victim kneeling in the street as O'Hara delivered repeated blows. A post-mortem revealed she died from multiple stab wounds. O'Hara had previously been convicted of murdering another girlfriend in 1998 under strikingly similar circumstances and was released on license in 2013. At Preston Crown Court, O'Hara admitted to murder and to wounding and assaulting the police officers. Recorder of Preston, Judge Anthony Russell QC, described him as very dangerous to women, sentencing him to life imprisonment without the possibility of release. The attacks on the officers resulted in additional sentences of 10 years and 2 years to run concurrently with his whole life term. Detective Superintendent Eddie Thistlethwaite called the killing truly horrendous and described O'Hara as a predatory and violent individual who manipulated his victims and showed little or no remorse. Ms. Shannon's family said her death had left them torn apart and tormented, adding that their lives would never be the same. They praised Lancashire police, particularly the officers who had tried to save her life. David Baxendale, 40, is a convicted killer who carried out a brutal stabbing murder of Sarah Thomas, a 38-year-old mother of 3, before fleeing the UK to Spain. The attack occurred on the 10th of May at Thomas's flat in Nutfield, Surrey, where Baxendale stabbed her multiple times. Paramedics arrived, but were unable to save her. Her body was found by her boyfriend on the living room floor, covered in blood. Baxendale fled immediately after the attack, first to Walton on the Hill, where his mother lived, and then to Portsmouth. Using his brother's passport, he boarded a ferry to Saint-Malo, France, before traveling to Fuengirola near Marbella, Spain. He was recognized by a member of the public following a police media appeal and was subsequently extradited back to the UK. Evidence collected by Surrey police linked Baxendale directly to the murder. His fingerprints were found in blood at the crime scene, and a blood-stained jacket, hidden in a garden, was recovered. Another bag containing clothing with traces of his DNA and Thomas's blood, along with blood-stained trainers, further confirmed his guilt. Baxendale had a long history of violent behavior, particularly involving knives. In 2001, while in Spain, he was jailed for murdering a man, stabbing him 14 times under the influence of alcohol and drugs. He was deported to the UK in 2008 and released from prison in 2009 under the supervision of the Surrey Probation Service. At Guildford Crown Court, Baxendale was sentenced to a whole life term, reflecting the severity of his crime and his repeated violent history. Detective Chief Inspector Steve Hayes described him as an extremely dangerous individual whose propensity for violence knows no bounds, underscoring the threat he posed both historically and at the time of Sarah Thomas's murder. Leroy Campbell was a convicted gapist and violent offender who went on to brutally gape and murder 37-year-old district nurse Lisa Skidmore in her home in Bilston, West Midlands, just months after being released from prison. In November 2016, Campbell climbed through her bedroom window using a ladder after watching the property in the days before. Over a period of 2 hours, he subjected Lisa to a violent sexual assault before strangling her to death. When her elderly mother Margaret unexpectedly arrived at the house, Campbell attacked her too, punching and strangling her before leaving her for dead. He then set fire to the bedroom where Lisa's body lay and turned on the gas in an attempt to destroy evidence, but Margaret was rescued by neighbors and firefighters. Campbell was arrested days later and later pleaded guilty to gape, murder, attempted murder, and arson with intent to endanger life. The judge sentenced him to a whole life order, meaning he will never be released. The case highlighted catastrophic failings in the probation service, which had been supervising Campbell after his release. Campbell had previously served 17 years for a similar attack on another woman and had openly told his probation officer that he felt like doing it again and had started looking at open windows. Despite these clear warning signs, he was not recalled to prison. An inquest later concluded that both the police and probation services had failed Lisa, and that their failings made more than a minimal contribution to her death. For Lisa's grieving family, including her mother who survived the attack, the knowledge that her murder could have been prevented has been especially painful. Campbell's crimes not only robbed the community of a kind and much-loved nurse, but also exposed systemic flaws in the management of high-risk offenders, leaving her family determined to seek justice and lasting change. Anthony Russell was sentenced to a whole life prison term for the murders of Julie Williams, her son David Williams, and Nicole McGregor near Leamington Spa in October 2020. The killings took place during a week-long spree in which Russell also gaped McGregor, who was 5 months pregnant. The court described his actions as exceptionally brutal, deliberate, and cold-blooded, with each death resulting from a separate, sustained act of violence. David Williams was strangled with a lanyard in his home, and his body was discovered 5 days later under his bed with 87 injuries. Police believe Russell killed him because he mistakenly thought David was involved with his girlfriend. Shortly afterward, Russell killed David's mother, Julie Williams, inflicting 113 injuries, apparently to prevent her from speaking to the police. Nicole McGregor was lured into woodland at Newbold Common, gaped, and strangled. She had met Russell just hours earlier and was reportedly drawn into the woods under the pretense of drugs rather than sexual activity. After her murder, Russell pretended to help her partner search for her while making cruel remarks about her pregnancy. During sentencing, Mr. Justice Wall emphasized that whole-life orders are reserved for the most serious cases, stating that Russell's crimes fell squarely within that category. Russell refused to attend the hearing, and attempts to get him into a prison van reportedly placed staff in danger. Prosecutors highlighted that his denial of gaping McGregor forced her family to relive her death during the trial, while his own barrister described him as a sad and pathetic individual. The court emphasized his capacity for extreme violence and manipulation, noting his willingness to harm anyone, known or unknown. The murders prompted one of the largest manhunts in recent UK history. Russell fled the area by attacking and stealing a car from a 78-year-old man, but was eventually arrested when police found him hiding in the stolen vehicle. John Maden, a 37-year-old man from Cheetham Hill, North Manchester, was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the murder of his 12-year-old niece, Tia Rigg. Maden lured Tia to his home under the pretext of babysitting, but once she arrived, he drugged, gaped, tortured, and killed her. After the murder, he called the police himself and was described as chillingly calm when officers arrived. The court heard that Maden had long been obsessed with violent pornography and child abuse material, maintaining an extensive library of images and literature detailing gape, torture, and methods of killing. Prosecutors argued that the murder was premeditated and carried out to act on these fantasies. Forensic evidence revealed that Tia had been stabbed in the abdomen and suffered severe internal injuries, and her agony had been prolonged. On the day of the murder, Maden had asked his sister to send Tia to his home. She arrived shortly before 3 p.m, and within 45 minutes, she was dead. During police interviews, Maden admitted to gaping and killing Tia, though he also claimed to hear voices in his head. At Manchester Crown Court, Mr. Justice Keith condemned Maden's actions as horrific, emphasizing that Tia had trusted her uncle and that the crime had been both deliberate and sexually motivated. The judge ruled that this was an exceptional case requiring a whole life sentence. Tia's mother, Lynn Rigg, and other family members attended the court proceedings. Lynn described the murder as a nightmare that would never end, but expressed relief that justice had been done and that Tia could now rest in peace. Detective Chief Inspector David Warren, who led the investigation, said that Maden had caused immense suffering to someone he was meant to love and would now spend the rest of his life reflecting on his actions. Damien Bendall was sentenced to a whole-life prison term for the murders of his pregnant partner, Terry Harris, her son, John Bennett, 13, daughter Lacey Bennett, 11, and Lacey's friend, Connie Gent, also 11, at a house in Chandos Crescent, Killamarsh, Derbyshire, in September 2021. Bendall killed the 4 victims with a claw hammer, inflicting brutal head and upper body injuries, and also gaped Lacey. The attacks were carried out over the course of an evening on the 18th of September, and the victims were discovered by police the following morning, after Bendall alerted his mother that he had harmed himself. Forensic evidence indicated that Lacey was attacked and gaped both downstairs and upstairs, with a ligature applied to her neck contributing to her death. Bendall admitted to all charges at Derby Crown Court, including the 4 murders and the gape of Lacey. Police body cam footage showed him calmly admitting outside the house, "I've murdered 4 people," and acknowledging that his partner was pregnant, joking that it could have been 5 murders. After the killings, he left the house with John's games console, intending to sell it for drugs. He had been under the influence of cocaine and cannabis at the time. Mr. Justice Sweeney sentenced Bendall to a whole life order, stating that the attacks were vicious, brutal, and cruel, and emphasizing that none of the victims stood a chance. The Crown Prosecution Service argued that only a whole life tariff was appropriate, and Bendall himself agreed, with his defense barrister confirming that nothing less would be warranted given the scale and severity of his crimes. Khairi Saadallah, a 25-year-old Libyan refugee, was sentenced to a whole life term after carrying out a deadly stabbing attack in Forbury Gardens, Reading, on the 20th of June 2020. Using an 8-inch kitchen knife, Saadallah randomly attacked 2 groups of people socializing in the park, killing 3 men and seriously injuring 3 others. The victims, all friends and members of the local LGBT+ community, died from single stab wounds to the neck and back. Saadallah was apprehended by police within minutes of the attack and later charged with 3 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. Born into a middle-class family in Libya, Saadallah had sought asylum in the UK in 2012, eventually being granted permission to remain in 2018. He had a history of criminal convictions between 2015 and 2019, including violent offences and possession of a bladed article. Intelligence agencies had previously monitored him over concerns about extremist intentions, and he had been released from prison just 17 days before the attack. During the assault, witnesses reported him shouting, "Allahu Akbar," and after his arrest, he admitted that he believed he would attain paradise for his actions. Investigators later found pro-ISIS materials and videos on his phone. Saadallah pleaded guilty in November 2020, and in January 2021, the judge confirmed the attack as a terrorist act designed to advance an extremist Islamic cause, handing him a whole life sentence with no possibility of release. The inquest, concluded in April 2024, found that the murders were preventable, highlighting significantly troubling failings in the management of Saadallah by mental health services, police, and other authorities. Memorials have since been established in Forbury Gardens to honour the victims James Furlong, Joe Ritchie Bennett, and David Wales, ensuring their deaths are not forgotten. Brian Whitelock was sentenced to a whole life term for the torture and murder of Wendy Buckney, 71, at her home in Clydach, near Swansea. Whitelock had previously served 18 years in prison for a double killing and had been released after being deemed low risk by the parole board. The attack on Buckney was described by Mr. Justice Griffiths as a frenzy of violence, resulting in a brutal, terrifying death. Whitelock, who was under the influence of Valium and alcohol at the time, carried out the assault for pleasure and derived sexual satisfaction from it. The judge confirmed that he will never be considered for parole. Whitelock's prior convictions include the 2001 murders of Nicholas Morgan, whom he beat to death with a pickaxe handle, or hammer, and his own brother, Glenn, who died of smoke inhalation when Whitelock set fire to Morgan's body in an attempt to cover up the crime. After becoming eligible for parole in 2018, Whitelock was released in January 2019, following an offender assessment that deemed his risk of committing another serious offence low, though it noted the risk could increase with drug or alcohol misuse. He was recalled later that year for attacking a supermarket worker, but was released again after demonstrating engagement with a drug and alcohol support program. Buckney had employed Whitelock to do odd jobs at her flat, despite concerns from her relatives that he was dangerous. In the weeks before the murder, neighbours called emergency services over his behaviour, but he discharged himself from hospital after receiving treatment. During the attack in August 2022, Whitelock assaulted Buckney with a knife, table leg, and wooden shelf, and sexually assaulted her. The jury heard that he may have been taking up to 30 diazepam tablets daily, drinking a crate of lager, and smoking cannabis at the time.